All right, so today I'm going to take you through an example of a functional blood chemistry analysis that I do with a lot of my clients. This is actually from a remote coaching client that lives overseas, a female, and we're going to spend just a couple minutes looking at this. Basically, we take the blood chemistry lab that you would do with your MD, so a lot of people already have this on hand, or we can pretty inexpensively order it if not. And we're able to do this analysis. We can see here that she's got, anything that's red here is going to be low or high, outside of the optimal range. See, the optimal range is much more narrow than what the MD would use on the regular lab test. So they're really looking for a broad range to diagnose a disease, and this is looking for, what is outside of optimal function. And she's got some findings here that are related to blood sugar management. Pretty much all this stuff. Same thing down here. This is this gamma, GDT. This is also going to be blood sugar related and kidney related. And then we have some interesting findings over here with lymphocytes being a little bit on the low side. That's an indication of a chronic infection that may be going on. Eosinophils, also another part of the immune system. And when this is high, this typically is because there's a parasitic infection. There could also just be like some sort of strong allergic response, whether it's really strong seasonal allergies at the time that the test was taken, which she did not have, or it could also be stuff like food sensitivities and reactions to foods and whatnot. Another thing I wanted to point out was her MCV, this mean corpuscular volume, was on the high side, and this shows up when there's a vitamin B12 deficiency. So we have some signs of, some possible chronic infections causing some inflammation potentially. If we have incomplete digestion, we're not going to be able to get the vitamin B12 out of the meat or the food that we're eating. Well, in this case, meat, because B12 is only available from meat. There's no vegetarian source for B12. And up here we've got some findings on glucose-related, blood sugar-related stuff. So that's really all we're going to hit. I just want to give you a quick gander at this, the rest of this report. We list out all the out-of-range markers right here in one place. If the thyroid and other stuff was included on the lab, we would have that in this report as well, but it wasn't. Then we have patterns. So we have a red pattern as primary, orange is secondary. And this lists out, we saw some signs of the blood sugar dysregulation, and this kind of tells us that it's secondary. And it's secondary to these nutrient deficiencies and this GI inflammation. So any kind of chronic stress response will drive some blood sugar imbalances. So anyways, this gives us kind of an overview. We can kind of flip through and read about each one and get more in-depth information. And then this looks at each marker individually and kind of educates the client as to, what it's all about. So further on, we've got more descriptions about each pattern, kind of what the symptoms are. So this can be used to kind of, correlate back to what they're actually experiencing. So it's just more, this is all just information supporting kind of what I've already told you. And then we have some recommendations as to what you can do lifestyle and diet-wise to make some improvements. So this is the, one of the analysis we like to run with each client when they're getting started with us, whether or not they're wanting to do lab tests with us, or if they're really just looking for some neurological training. This gives us a good overview as to what's going on. Then from here we can kind of select, what lab tests we might want to run so that we can further support their metabolic function, get their immune system working right, their digestion, and detox and whatnot. So I'm going to go ahead and pull up another lab. Hopefully I already have this up here. Yep. And we're going to take a look at this. So this is a GI map. This isn't for the same client, but this is the kind of stuff we would find when we have the other findings from that original report. So I'm bringing this up as an example. Basically this is a stool test that uses DNA sequencing to find different parasites, bacteria, yeast, and what have you. that's in the GI tract. And this gives us a lot of valuable information. It's the only lab that uses an FDA-approved testing protocol. So their methods are really good, and I really like the selection of like clinically, it gives you a lot of good information that you can correlate back to what's going on with the client. So as you can see, we got negatives on all the stuff up front here in the beginning, but then we have a positive for H. pylori. So we're measuring high on H. pylori. H. pylori is a stomach infection. It exists in greater than 50% of the world's population. A smaller percentage of that population, whenever there's a VAC-A or CAG-A present, this is like a substance that's inserted into the cells or secreted by the H. pylori. This VAC-A actually causes cell death on the stomach lining. So this directly causes ulcers. It's also, besides being the number one cause of ulcers, H. pylori is also the number one cause of gastric cancer and some types of cancers that are in the upper part of the small intestine, because H. pylori can colonize that as well. And that's a small percentage of the people that have H. pylori. Most people just have gastric pain, called gastritis is what MDs refer to that as. Or they have no symptoms at all that directly tie back to this. So this can have profound effects on somebody's function, because it actually inhibits your ability to create hydrochloric acid. It can damage the cells that create hydrochloric acid in the stomach. It also creates an enzyme called urease, which actually cancels out or buffers the acid produced by the stomach, thus protecting the H. pylori so it doesn't get killed off by the acid. But it also results in you not being able to digest your proteins very well. So you can't extract the B12 out of it. You can't extract the minerals. You can't extract the amino acids. So this has been known to cause iron deficiency as well as B12 deficiency. And that's really, really important because, it literally embeds into the stomach lining and it gets below the stomach mucosa, so below the mucosal lining. And it hides out from the immune system. It creates a chronic stress response. Lots of people have high cortisol levels or some sort of adrenal dysfunction whenever they have this infection. It's typically like something like 80% of people with H. pylori get it when they're 5 years old, and they tend to have it for life unless they're treated for it. And you can go to your MD, you can get antibiotics. There's a relatively high recurrence rate from antibiotics because it's not very common for them to retest and make sure it's gone. It's also not very common for them to follow up with healing the GI tract and healing the stomach lining that was damaged so that they don't get recolonized, as well as increasing the production of hydrochloric acid and restoring deficient nutrients like B12 that are important for hydrochloric acid production. So it kind of develops into this like vicious cycle when you have this for a long time. So with the findings we had before with like the low B12, it's very common to find something like H. pylori. This test also looks at normal flora. In this case, they're low. Looks at dysbiotic flora and opportunistic flora that are basically types of bacteria that will overgrow when the good bacteria is depressed, as well as some of these are tied to autoimmune type triggers. They can trigger autoimmunity in certain people with certain biochemistry. We've also found a parasite here. Again, that's fairly common to find whenever there is high levels of eosinophils on the blood chemistry panel. And then we've got some yeast overgrowth. So overall, this person has a lot of dysbiosis going on. Decreased immune function down here with the SIG-A. Anti-gliadin is kind of a measurement of like antibodies that are being created against a peptide in gluten. So it's essentially an autoimmune response to gluten. And that can damage a lot more than the gluten. And it can actually damage your GI tract and drive inflammation, activate the parasites, and create more activity there. Then we see, another big one is, a low elastase. That is an indirect measurement of pancreatic enzymes, which are needed to digest your food well enough to absorb them at the site of absorption in the small intestine. And whenever this number is low, that's generally secondary to low hydrochloric acid. So again, like we talked about with H. pylori, it's very common to have low hydrochloric acid, in which case we're going to then see this enzyme being low, because digestive enzymes are what triggers them to be released is the hydrochloric acid production in the stomach, moving into the small intestine. That acidic mixture ends up triggering the enzyme release. So when you don't get enough acidity, you don't get a strong response, and the nervous system is not going to tell the pancreas to release the enzymes into the small intestine. So, anyways, just wanted to give everybody kind of a big picture view as to how we're using some of these functional lab reports analysis, along with how that kind of drives our decision making as to what types of labs we're going to order to work with somebody. And this is something we like to do with all of our clients, even the ones just looking for some improvements in neurological symptoms, or trying to improve movement and overall neurological function. So if you have any questions, definitely feel free to reach out. This is definitely a pretty simple thing to put together, and look forward to hearing from you. Thanks.